Good morning, Smarter News. We have an incredible story to cover today that has all the themes of great news stories. Themes like David versus Goliath, big business versus small business, the rich and the powerful versus the average Joe, and then all these underlying themes. Who has access really? How free are we really to have access? Who's behind the scenes? These are the big questions of any of the big news stories that we've been covering really over the last year or the last several decades. And this is really all focused on the stock market, a company called Gamestop, and many other names of firms that you may not be familiar with. So let me just start there. At the beginning of this week, I had no idea we'd be covering this story. If you're like, what's going on here? You're not alone. In fact, I had to do a lot of reporting last night, which is why we're actually doing this Instagram Live today, because we have to unpack this. This story is moving markets around the world. It is capturing global headlines, and it started with GameStop, a video game retailer. How did we get here? What is going on? I'm about quick, concise, nonpartisan information, but every once in a while, we got to take a deep breath. We got to get a cup of coffee. Get yours. We got to put our ponytail up. If you don't have one, that's okay. Relax, take a little time together and dig in. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to make this fun. So I'm going to go ahead and invite our good friend Guy in. See if we can do this. For Guy, by the way, which we'll talk about in just a second. I've known Guy for probably a decade now. Before I had kids, Guy Adami, which means it was a different lifetime altogether. Do you remember me without children? I mean, we've known each other for a long time, Guy.
So we have known each other for a long time. First of all, I'm thrilled to be with you. Huge fan, as you know. I enjoyed your work before we knew each other. Then we met each other. And then I got to know your stud of a husband, who is just, can I say badass on Instagram Live? Am I allowed to say that?
I mean, I don't know. They could pull us off at any moment, really, guys. So you might as well just go for it.
Well, I mean, Lieutenant Commander Leif Babin he is a badass. And if Jenna's podcast is amazing. Her website's amazing. But Jocko and Leif have something incredible going on. And you all folks, I'm sure most of you know who they are. You should definitely check them out because they are, listen, not only brilliant people, they're absolute heroes, and it's true. I mean,
I didn't pull you on this to talk about us though. We have to talk about the news story of the day, Guy.
It's crazy.
We have to. Okay, so here's the thing. Before we get started, I do want to preface this. You have worked in the stock market a long time. You have a lot of experience. You also have worked on television, with CNBC. You talk to huge audiences, so you know the market. I want everyone to know I started in business news, not knowing anything about stocks, mixing up profit and revenue, making the mistakes that a young journalist makes. And so if people are coming to this story cold and are kind of like, this is overwhelming, it is overwhelming. It's actually a very overwhelming story. And that's why we need a little extra time to unpack it. But this is why when we were talking last night, and let me just give everyone the background on this. Thank you, that's right. We've got our coffee. Please. I call Guy. This is the kind of guy he is. I call Guy and he's waiting in the car for his wife to get her hair done at 9 o'clock at night.
Single process and foils, just so you know. I know what that is.
So this is how we started the conversation. And I was like, no, we got to do this conversation in front of Smarter News. And it's your experience. I just want people to understand that the experience that you bring to the table here is really invaluable. So we're lucky to have you. And this might be your first Instagram Live ever. Am I right, Guy?
You could not be more right. And just the backstory is my daughter, who's a junior in college but home, she had to walk me through this entire thing from downloading Instagram to pushing on the Smarter News icon when it goes, the circles. And the whole thing is just a mystery to me. So
we got to get you off of Twitter with all those angry people and get you to Instagram where there's sunsets and there's like people in bathing suits and families and Smarter News. I mean, this is where we got to we're pulling you over. Okay. You're going to be indoctrinated.
Twitter is a dark place. I got to tell you something. And there are 3 ways to handle Twitter, Jen. And you know this. I think you can diffuse, you can basically ignore, or you could escalate. And I choose to try to diffuse, and I try to do it in a fun way. But I got to tell you, there are a lot of angry people out there for a myriad of different reasons. And I think the story we're about to talk about, quite frankly, is one of those many reasons. Well, this has actually made it to the top of the list.
Okay, cool. That's a great kind of entree into what's going on. So you started, when we started our conversation last night, one of the things you did great is you just broke down, like, listen, just a reminder, when you're talking about the stock market, the majority of trades happen one way,
Right.
but there's trades that can happen the other way. And maybe that's just where we need to start. And then we'll kind of reverse to the beginning of the week. So why don't you just tell us overall, what do we need to know about the stock market and the way it works to understand what's going on with this story?
So we have close to 800 people here. And obviously, thanks everybody for joining. You're here for Jenna, not for me, but it's your time is as valuable as anybody else's. So thank you, number one. Number two is, for the majority of you people, if not everybody here, the way you make money in the stock market vis-a-vis investments, 401ks, 529s, whatever it is when stocks go higher. You buy a stock at $1 with the hope that it goes to $1.50. And that's true for 99% of our population. There are investors, traders, hedge funds that try to profit from making sure, or trying to have things go lower. In other words, to bet on companies failing. And sometimes that's very successful. If you've been in the market long enough, Jenna, you will know that stocks, there's an old expression, stocks take the stairs up and the elevator down. So although most people make money on the way up, things go down faster than they go higher. And we've seen it hundreds of different times. As a matter of fact, we saw it in February and March of last year when the stock market went down 35% in a record period of time, shortest period of time in history. So you can see how things go down, how fast they go down. And people do play things from, as we say in our business, the short side. And there were bets made on the short side in a company called Gamestop. Now, you can think about the reasons why you would bet on Gamestop to do poorly. The world changed for them. Obviously, instead of putting cartridges in our
Like
Sony
Nintendo.
PlayStations or Nintendo,
Yeah.
people starting to download games. So there wasn't the reason to go to a brick and mortar store. So their business, there was a tectonic shift under their feet in the first place. And then later on top of that, a pandemic where people weren't going anywhere. And that was sort of the double whammy for GameStop. And
okay, time out there for a second.
Go ahead.
Because people know GameStop, you're in a mall, it's a retailer, you go in, you could buy video games. That's, I can envision the way the sign looks outside.
Mm-hmm.
But as you mentioned, it's a publicly traded company, which
Sure
people may not know, which means that I can buy stock in GameStop. And if I, with the hope that in most cases that the stock would go up.
That's
but
right.
Others are betting against it, saying like, listen, the conditions are looking like this company is not going to do well, so I'm actually going to short it. I'm going to short the company, and that way, if it doesn't go well for them, it's going to go well for me.
That's exactly right. As the Molly Hatchet song goes, for you Molly Hatchet fans out there, great. In their debut album came out, I believe, in 1980. But one of the songs off Flirting with Disaster was "One man's pleasure is another man's pain," and that's exactly true here. One man's pain, one company's pain was a lot of people's pleasure. And GameStop went down for a very long time for all the reasons we just talked about. And that trade was working until the last couple of weeks. Back to you, Jenna Lee.
Okay. So that is very good. Okay. So this is, everyone's kind of going about their business. We go through the Christmas holiday. We're kind of wondering what's happening with the, inauguration, new administration. And we've kind of not been paying that much attention. I mean, I haven't as much attention to the stock market, but we know there's been it's been a very volatile time. And there's been some questions about what's happening with the economy and the stock market overall. And so all of a sudden, now from my side, maybe not from your side, there's these headlines about these groups and GameStop and who's buying the stock and who shorted it. So do we know who was betting against GameStop doing well?
We do know that. And the name of that company is Melvin Capital, which nobody has really ever heard of until the last couple of weeks. And the person that runs it is somebody named Gabe Plotkin, who nobody probably has ever heard of either. And that's fine. But I will tell you that this is a hedge fund that I think has been in existence since 2006. And don't at me if I'm wrong by a year or two. And they've returned about 30% per year. So this is a very successful manager. It's been a very successful hedge fund. And oh, by the way, and this is just one more layer to this story, Gabe Plotkin worked for a guy named Steve Cohen. Now, I don't know where your audience is, but a lot of people have heard about Steve Cohen over the last month and a half, because that's the gentleman that just bought the New York Mets from the Wilpon family. So he's now involved in this situation. So to answer your question, we're going to go step by step. The one group that was betting against it in a major way was a company called Melvin Capital. Again, Gabe Plotkin worked for Steve Cohen for years. Then he went on his own. Steve Cohen invested money with him many years ago, and that's where this story begins. Back to you.
Okay, so question about Melvin Capital. Does everybody know that it is betting against Gamestop? Hold on, guys. We have a little. Don't go anywhere. Guy, if you can still see us, we're getting the circle of death. So hang on. Let's just see if we can get Guy back. This is too good not to. And if we need to start over, we can start over. I'll save this part of the video. I don't know. Oh, there he goes. Let me go ahead and invite him back. I'm telling you guys, this technology thing. Who's watching us? That's what we want to know. Who's cutting us off? No, what I was going to ask Guy, and what we will when you bring him back in, you have to remember that some of these dramas in the stock market start sounding like episodes of The Real Housewives. And that it actually is like that. That there's a lot of different players to this, and their personalities, their past relationships actually really matter. Guy, we don't know if you said something that
I'm back. No,
disturbed
I don't know what. Yeah, you know what? It's funny you say that. I mean, you wonder sometimes, like, there are greater forces at work.
I know. Okay, but
anyway,
I was actually telling them, and I think you could probably validate this, is that a lot of the drama in the stock market, we have these images of guys in suits and like the big movies. It's kind of like a saga from The Real Housewives of Wall Street. There's the personalities and egos get involved. So my question was, do people know that this big hedge fund, this powerful hedge fund, was betting on the demise of GameStop?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. People find out about these things in a myriad of different ways. Sometimes you have to disclose it publicly, but natural curiosity will take you a long way in life. And there are people that spend their lives trying to figure out how the poker table is set up, who has what cards. And that's the same thing in the stock market. So there are people that spend their lives trying to figure out, okay, who is levered to this position and what is their pain threshold? How can we find that pressure point? And so there were people that knew about Melvin Capital's short position.
Okay, so what you said also is really important, the pressure point. Because the way that markets move, sometimes when you make the wrong bet, you can really lose a lot of money, right?
Sure,
so you bet for a stock to go up and it goes down, you lose a lot of money. If you bet for a stock to go down, you're betting against the company, and the stock goes way, way up, then you can lose a lot of money.
Okay.
And so what happened here?
So let me bring another word into this conversation. And I don't want to get too wonky here, but the next word I want to bring in the conversation is leverage. Okay, leverage. So when people want to make bets, sometimes they're so convinced that they're right that they're going to lever those bets. So they invest, let's just say $10, and they lever it 10 times. So all of a sudden the position which was X is now 10X. And leverage is an extraordinarily powerful thing when things are going your way. It's an extraordinarily dangerous thing when things are going against you. And think about this for a second. If you own something, a stock, it can only go to zero in theory. But if you're short something and don't own it, something against it to protect you, it could literally go to infinity. Now, I know that's a ridiculous thing to say, but let's just talk about GameStop real quick. I mean, the fundamentals of the company, Jen, and I think this is important to bring up, they haven't changed. Nothing has fundamentally changed at GameStop. They didn't come up with a cure for the coronavirus. They didn't come up with some new video game that everybody needs. Nothing really changed. The only thing that changed is the market structure and the forces at work against this short seller. And that leverage that was working for him on the way down is now working against him. And that's why a stock can go from $9 in September to $481 or ish a couple days ago.
Okay, so why did the stock suddenly become, I mean, there's, like you said, nothing's changed. The economy hasn't changed. People aren't suddenly rushing back to GameStops in the mall.
Right.
So why suddenly so we know about this big company banging against the stock saying, yeah, this is not going to work. And all of a sudden you get this flood of people that are buying the stock and pushing that stock price way, way up this week. So why did that happen?
Okay, so that's another part of this conversation. How did this possibly happen? Now, if you watch CNBC or Fox Business or Bloomberg, or now if you're watching your local news, I'll give you an example. This story has become so large that I was actually on Australian television last night. They tracked me down somehow, and we had the same conversation we're having in obviously a much smaller way on an because that's how fascinated people are by this. So this has now made its way into every reach seemingly of this country and other countries. So how did that happen? Well, again, leverage is powerful for you on the way down. It's very deleterious on the way up. Now, what happened was, and I've heard of it, but I didn't know what it was. There was a group of people on this Reddit platform. And one of the chat groups is something called Wall Street Bets. And I don't know, now for you Godfather fans out there, I'm one of them. I could basically do the entire movie by myself. But I bring this up for a very specific reason, and we talked about this last night. If you look at the Mario Puzo book, it's the illustration on the book is basically a puppeteer with strings, and that's the whole thing about the movie and the mafia and those things. There's always someone that's pulling the strings. You just don't really know who they are. And there's a scene in the car in Godfather 1 when Marlon Brando talks to Al Pacino just after having a big meeting, and Brando says to Pacino, and don't conflate this, but I'm just trying to make a point. He basically says, Tattaglia is a pimp. He could never have outfought Santino, which was his other son. What I learned now, it's been Barzini all along. So Barzini was the puppet master. So what's my point in bringing that up? Well, I think the pawns in this game, and by the way, pawns that have probably done very well for themselves, the pawns are the guys and gals on this Reddit platform. They're the ones doing all the heavy lifting. But the question you have to ask yourself, who is the puppet master here?
Okay,
Who's
so
the
wait.
person controlling those strings?
So what happened is you have this group that found out about this short of GameStop, and they decided en masse to buy GameStop stock. The stock goes way, way up. These are average investors. These are people like us. These aren't like a big hedge fund. And in some ways, the kind of underlying theme here is like, yeah, we know about this big firm. And you know what? We're going to buy the stock. They're going to get squeezed. And guess what? That's what happens when the little guy gets to come up. And so that's what's going on. So you got this little guy, pardon the, like, we're going to go for it. And you have these people with a lot of money, this big hedge fund getting squeezed, their position getting squeezed. And they're really, as the stock's going up, they're getting more worried about what's happening to their position. And
they are, Jenna, just so people understand, they are forced to cover their position. In other words, they're forced to buy back the stock. Now you'd say, well, that should be theoretically pretty interesting. Well, if you have people driving the price up and there's no supply to buy, you see that price goes up exponentially. And that's what we're seeing here. Not only that, and I don't want to get too wonky here, but if you've levered that position with derivatives or options, that becomes even exponentially more difficult because the volatility in something like that explodes to the upside. And that's the double whammy. So to your point, there are people pushing the price higher, and it has become this, it's interesting what's going on. This is the Wall Street. What was that whole phenomenon we saw the when they inhabited Wall Street? I forget the whole title.
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy Wall Street. So this is effectively Occupy Wall Street 2.0. This is the little guys and gals, and I put that in quotes because they're just as important as anybody else. But that's them saying, you know what? We're going to rage against the machine. We don't want the establishment anymore. We can do this. And they prove to a lot of people in a lot of ways that they understand more about risk, derivatives, convexity than maybe the people that are supposed to understand it.
Okay, so let me just pause you there again. So one of the things to remember is like when I go and buy, like if I went and bought GameStop, like I'm not leveraging my position. I'm just buying the stock. But when these big firms are leveraging their position, all you have to think about without getting trips up on that is that they're placing bets upon bets upon bets.
Mm-hmm.
And when one domino starts to fall, all these dominoes start to fall, and that's why they're so at risk. And that's why
right.
it causes this where I'm doing it, I'm not layering. I'm just like buying a stock. That's what's happening. And if it goes up, I want to sell it and I'm going to make money. It's a little bit different. So what's the big deal then, Guy? So fine. So like this hedge fund got caught, like the little guy like was able to rally this stock and, why? So that could happen all the time. So why
Absolutely.
is it in the news?
It's a big deal for a number of different reasons, because I think, well, I mean, this is an extraordinarily complex situation, but to answer the question, it's a big deal because for the first time in history, literally in history, we've seen a situation where the underdog, Davy, has beaten Goliath in a lot of ways. And that's what people are talking about. This is Davy versus Goliath. This is Main Street versus Wall Street. And there's some satisfaction in that people say, you know what? We're sticking it to the man. And I use that term. I think people understand what I'm saying. And I totally get it. And I will tell you that, Darwinism works in all facets of life. And this is Darwinism in the stock market. And I support the little guys and little gals. And I use, again, that term loosely in terms of what they're trying to do, because there is a democratization going on. And they've proven to a lot of people that you can be just as successful as people that get paid a large amount of money to handle people's investments. So it's such a fascinating story that, again, anti-establishment that we've seen all across different facets of life. Well, it's making its way into our world now. And you know what? There's something really empowering about that, I think.
But there's also something else that happened, which is that you can buy stocks in different ways. And so one firm that is, so not the big firm that was shorting the stock, but another firm that wants to give access to people, they say, to buying and selling stock, decided to prevent suddenly the little guy or gal from doing it, right? So what's that chapter of this story?
that's another sort of tentacle in this story, is what you're talking about is Robinhood. And I'm sure most of the people that have tuned in, and I love some of the comments that I'm seeing. Real quick, Jenna, somebody just said, ask Jay Powell. And I want to talk about the Federal Reserve in a second, because that gentleman or lady brings up a fascinating point. But to answer your question about Robinhood, Robinhood was a platform created. His name is Vlad Telev, I believe that's his last name. And it was effectively a platform that was created to democratize, again, to use that word, trading and Wall Street and zero commissions. And we're here for the little guy. And if you think about what Robinhood is, it's robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. And I think people were empowered by that. And they loved the platform and they loved everything that Robinhood stood for. Something changed yesterday. And what changed? To your point, Robinhood in the early part of the day halted trading, didn't allow their client base to trade a number of different stocks, Gamestop being one of them. Now, I'm not privy to what's going on in the internals of Robinhood, but there are all kinds of theories going around as to why that happened. But effectively, it doesn't. The reasons don't matter. I will tell you that it pissed people off. So everything they stood for, they basically turned their back on.
Why did they do that, though? Why?
That's the question you have to ask yourself. And that's the question. Why would they do that? Understanding that they understand who their client base is. Why would Robinhood make a decision that they knew was going to come back to haunt them in terms of the media spotlight and the rancor it was going to create? So the question is, why would they do that? Who's the puppet master there? Who's pulling the Robinhood strings? Like, why would they do something that they know was going to jeopardize their business?
So that's something that I think we should, and I got a great question from Tina. I want to ask it in a second. Again, if you have 3 minutes on the regular news and you have to do this whole story in 3 minutes, it's much easier to put things in the pot of like David versus Goliath, and the little guy did this and the big guy's here. We should be careful though. The story's not over yet. What the little guy's fate is TBD.
Mm-hmm.
The big guy's fate is the market's moving all the time. And you asked, like, who's pulling the strings? Is there even though it could, on the surface level, look like the little guy got the comeuppance, could they be being manipulated to push this trade for somebody else? I mean, is there another player in here that we don't even
There are a lot of different players, and I just saw somebody, and I'm trying to read this quickly. The comments are coming fast and furious, but somebody said Citadel owns a portion of Robinhood. That's true, and I don't want to go necessarily down the Citadel rabbit hole, but I encourage your people, if they have their computers open, just go to your Google machine and Google Ken Griffin. That's the gentleman that owns Citadel, and Citadel is an extraordinarily powerful company. But to answer your question, there was also a great movie. The Godfather is obviously the greatest movie of all time. Godfather 1 and 2. Do not watch 3, but 1 and 2 is tremendous. What are you laughing at? I know you're from San Francisco.
Because I can see you. Because I can see you as like an extra in one of the guys. Like yo. Like, that's how I can see you. So I think it's funny that you keep bringing it up. And I'm like trying to follow the plot line. I haven't watched it in a while.
I don't pattern myself a yo one. I like to think of myself more as like a young Michael Corleone, just so we understand each other. I have the temper of Santino. There's not a lot of Fredo in me, but I have the sort of the cunning of Michael. I digress.
We're all going to be watching this movie tonight, right? We're like,
go to Blockbuster tonight, rent this movie, and then you're going to enjoy it. Have a cup of coffee.
Next to your GameStop.
Next to your GameStop. So another great movie, and this actually was a great movie, Jen.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I'm
but
listening.
The movie was Boiler Room. And I will tell you that I love Ben Affleck. He's a badass. I will watch him read the phone book. But he was in this movie for about 4 minutes.
I'm just writing down tag Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck.
Okay, got it. Good.
He's a fan of Smarter News. No question about it.
Why wouldn't he?
Why wouldn't he be?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you remember Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins was only in Silence of the Lambs for 14 minutes, stole the movie. Why do I bring that up? Because Ben Affleck was in Boiler Room for about 5, and he stole the movie. But to answer your question, in Boiler Room, there were all these different brokers that were making their calls to their clients, getting them to buy, and I'm going to use the term they use, dog shit stocks. Stocks that had no business being even publicly traded companies, but they were getting all these people to do that. And when you get all these people to do a certain thing, it's become self-fulfilling. And those brokers made money, but they were the pawns in the game. The real puppet master here was the guy behind the glass, the guy in the office room that was pulling all the strings. And he had the brokers doing his dirty work. So why do I bring that up? Because the pawns in this game, people that are still doing well and making money, are a lot of these gals and guys on the Reddit platform. But you have to ask yourself, who's really behind this? Who's masterminding this? Who's driving this?
But that's, again,
and there could be a number of different people.
So you brought this up last night, and I hadn't heard anything about this. Again, just kind of jumping into the story. But we have all these names: Citadel, big hedge funds, blah blah blah. Reddit, the social media platform. I kind of knocked Twitter earlier, but on Twitter earlier this week, Elon Musk said something. Mm-hmm. Did Elon Musk start this whole thing?
Okay, so let's stop. Again, another facet of this story. So obviously Elon Musk, I'm sure most of the 900 people here know who he is, but he's the founder and the CEO of Tesla. Now, Tesla has become obviously one of the great stories of the last year and a half. And Elon Musk is a bit of a wild card. And, good for him. There have been transformative people throughout history, and Elon Musk is one of them. He's also sort of, you wonder about him from time to time in terms of where his head is at. And on, what's today, Friday? I think it was Tuesday. Don't at me if I'm wrong. But I think it was Tuesday at 4:30. So 4:30 Eastern time, the stock market is closed. New York Stock Exchange closes at 4 o'clock. At 4:30, Elon Musk tweeted out, "Game stonks." One word. Game stonks. Now, obviously, that's a play on GameStop, and stonks has been this word that's been thrown around over the last year in sort of the ether of the trading community. And you say to yourself, why would a CEO of a publicly traded company tweet something like that? Like, what is he thinking? So it got me thinking, like, why would he do something like that? Well, because we mentioned this Melvin Capital. One of the other bets that Melvin Capital made was a short bet in, guess what, Jenna Lee? I'm opening it up to you.
In Tesla.
In Tesla. That's exactly right. And Elon Musk, as we've probably learned, he's got some Sicilian in him. He doesn't forget clearly. And he's got a
He's
long
like
memory.
the Godfather.
Makes you wonder. So why would he do something like that? Because I think there's a level of vindictiveness to him as well. And I think he saw what was going on, and he was going to be like, I'm pour a little gasoline onto this fire, and let's just see what happens. And oh, by the way, after he tweeted that, GameStop, I think went up about $75, which at the time I think it was trading 150 or so. I think after he tweeted that, the stock was $75 higher, adding to whatever Surus, good word by the way, look it up, that the guys and gals at Melvin Capital were having. So he's inserted himself into this conversation as well.
So it gets back to the Real Housewives of Wall Street. Like we got a little bit of like little jabs, little something in the background, and still the question of who's really behind this, and ultimately who's really going to make the money. Tina was asking on our feed here, the original fund, the original hedge fund that had the short on the stock, whose money were they using? Like whose money are they managing?
Great question. That's another great question. Who has money in Melvin Capital? I can't speak intelligently about the client base of Melvin Capital. But what I will tell you is, and the reason why in a few minutes I have to leave you to join WFAN 101.9 FM, the sports radio station, you'd be like, why would they care?
Wait, what time do you have to go? Because we're not done here.
And I'm going to hang out for a while. But listen, quickly, the reason why I'm going to be with them is because, as I mentioned earlier, Steve Cohen bought the Mets. Steve Cohen was one of the earlier investors in Melvin Capital. And the concern of Met fans is, wait a second, Stevie Cohen has money here. Is this going to be a Will Pond situation 2.0 where my team, who I thought was going to spend millions of dollars on players, is not going to be able to spend anything? So it's made its way into the sports world as well.
Okay, so is this affecting the entire market? Like, is this actually moving the entire market around the world? This story about a video game retailer is moving.
I believe that it is. Now, you'll be like, you're out of your mind. And listen, I think we both agree, and to the extent that you people have been here for the last half hour, they've probably come to the realization that I am out of my mind, which is fine. And I think, most of the most interesting people in the world typically be a little crazy. But I do think it's moving the market. And the one thing we look at to sort of gauge complacency in the market is something called the volatility index. And the symbol for that, and a lot of you guys and gals have heard it, is the VIX. Mm-hmm. And the volatility index has been trading around 21 or 22, which over the last year and a half has been at the lower end of the range. A couple days ago, the volatility index traded from 21 to 40. It doubled in basically a day. And you say to yourself, well, why would it do something like that? Because I think what GameStop has pointed out is the leverage in the system is not just in GameStop. This might be a much, much bigger problem. So GameStop might be, as they say in the business, the tip of the iceberg. So to your point, I think GameStop and everything around it and all the ancillary stories is actually triggering the market sell-off we've seen over the last couple of days.
So a great question. We got this a couple times last night as I teased our conversation, which is there anything going on here that is illegal? Is anything happening here that's illegal or unethical to the point that we're in this conversation suddenly where you have lawmakers talking about regulation? Right. Yeah. And like this is a hard enough story to understand. So
it is.
What would be the regulation on this, or why would we even go there?
So as I like to say, I'm not humorless or smart enough to be a lawyer or work for the SEC, and I don't think that any laws have been broken. But you said, is it unethical? Well, this started in a chat room. Is it unethical for a group of people in a chat room to collectively say, let's go and buy this stock? I don't know the answer. I really don't know the answer to that. But what I will tell you is it's absolutely going to come under the microscope of a number of different regulators, not least of which the SEC. So maybe at some point they do drop the hammer on these chat rooms and they do investigate.
But why would the
ultimate puppet master might be?
I see, because we actually don't know. It could be one of these other big firms getting in there, ginning people up. Right. We don't know who's actually behind this. And so my first thought was like, well, wait a minute. This is like going down to the local bar and you're talking with people and like you're talking about stuff. And then, I don't know, like, is it collusion? You're like, you're talking to your friends, But if you don't know who the players are, we're assuming that these are all normal people like us. if we don't know who they are, then is someone in the background manipulating this group to feel like, yeah, we're going to rage against the machine, but somewhere down the line, it's the machine that's actually benefiting.
Yes. And I don't know who, and I've heard things from, I mean, I left my Reynolds wrap and my tinfoil in the kitchen, so I don't have the tinfoil hat on right now. Apologies. But I've heard anything from, Russian bots to, Chinese, all different kinds of crazy things that are, I don't know if obviously I have no information, no insight as to any of this is true. But what I will tell you is, having done this a long time, although the microscope and the lens is on this Reddit crowd and Wall Street bets,
yeah,
there's something bigger going on. There's somebody, again, going back to that, pulling the strings, the puppeteer thing. There's somebody or some group of people that are behind this. And I think, instead of the boiler rooms of the 80s, they're using these chat rooms to their advantage now. And I think this is all going to come out in the wash at a certain point. Like, there are many chapters left in this. The Robinhood chapter is still something we need to talk about. How Citadel, why did Citadel's name come up in this?
Right.
Citadel, I will tell you, it put in a $2 billion infusion into Melvin Capital. And you say, so, well, why would they do that? Stevie Cohen, the owner of the Mets, put $750 million into Melbourne Capital. Why would he do that? They took a minority ownership in his company. But what's behind all this? And that's why Met fans are so apoplectic.
So just
think, oh my God, Stevie's not going to be able to go out and get Trevor Bauer. Not
so
more the
let me just connect the dots.
Out of you.
Robinhood, who has a lot of average Joe investors, shuts down the ability for these investors to buy the stock yesterday. Mm-hmm. They've come off that a little bit.
Yes, they have.
Behind Robinhood is Citadel, this other major big firm. Citadel has a ton of money invested in Melvin Capital, who's getting squeezed. And so the question is, what is the communication line here?
You are connecting dots here. And again,
okay.
I want to be very careful. I don't know.
We don't know.
No, we don't know. And I want to be very careful. Yeah. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to illustrate how all these things, all the names that we talked about, are somehow connected. And it's a fascinating story. And again, you have to ask yourself, why would Robinhood, who knows what their bread and butter is, who was created, this democratization of Wall Street, little guy against the big guy, Dave versus Goliath, robbing from the rich, giving to the poor. Why would they do something yesterday that they knew, they had to know, was going to come back and bite them into you-know-what? What was really behind it? What were the forces at work for them to make that decision? And that's the questions we really need to be asking. And it's going to come out. Like, this will come out over time. And I think I understand it. I think, Jenna, you sort of touching on some things, but I'm not suggesting I'm right. I'm just trying to connect the dots from my perch.
This is also to explain like why this story is so big and why there's this intrigue around this story that started with a video game retailer. On that note, it's important to point out that AMC, major movie theater chain, right? We know what's happened to movies. Right. It's not been a great year for them with the pandemic. There's been a short position on this publicly traded company, and now we're seeing the same pattern repeat itself. And so part of understanding this story is that it's not just this. It's a question of, if this pattern repeats, what does that mean for the market overall? Like, what does that mean for, your retired father who has money in the market? And we're seeing this is the chain reaction that we got to big picture it.
It's an amazing, what does it mean for the structure of the market? Now, embedded in that question is, do you believe that short sellers serve a purpose? Now, there are a lot of people that say they serve no purpose whatsoever. I understand that.
Wait, could you short a stock? Could you, going back to the beginning of the stock market, could you always short a stock, or is shorting a stock relatively new in recent decades?
That has been a phenomenon that's gone out as long as stocks have been traded. There have been people that have done this. I encourage some of your listeners and viewers to go back and Google Irwin Jacobs, Irwin with an I, Jacobs.
I'll write that down.
Please do. And look up Conseco, and look up Carl Icahn, and look up, I'm trying to think of some other situations. Look up what happened in Tilray a couple of years ago. So if you don't think short squeezes happen, they happen all the time.
Right, yes.
We just happen to be talking about them in the context of Wall Street bets, the world of social media, rage against the establishment. Like, this has taken on a life of its own. And oh, by the way, Robinhood inserting themselves in this conversation, and then halting trading in something that they know that their entire client base is probably doing is problematic as well. So yes, short selling is also, but what is the purpose of a short seller? I would submit that these are guys and gals that serve a purpose. They might point out to people some of the flaws in the system, some of the inherent flaws in companies. You know, if we had listened to the short sellers in 08, 09 telling us about Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, maybe we would have been tipped off to some of the problems that existed in Wall Street. So I think they do serve a purpose. The problem now is a lot of these high profile short sellers are saying, you know what, I can't do this anymore. As a matter of fact, and Google this name, Citron Research, which is also embedded in this, in Citron, CITRON, they just announced today, Andrew Left, their founder and CEO, just announced today that, you know what, I can't do it anymore. I'm getting death threats. It's not worth it. I'm done playing things from the short side. So this is just one more layer of this story.
Okay, so I have one more question, just to kind of bring a big picture, and then I want to take some questions from our viewers before we wrap up, because I know you're very busy and you have international press that's like knocking on your door, and you got to go watch like the Godfather, not 2, but 3, 1 and 3, not 2.
No, Jenna, please. No. Please don't, you know, I know you have red hair, so the Godfather, I mean, I know Diane Keaton was your favorite character in the Godfather, but it's Godfather 1 and 2. Godfather 3 doesn't count. For you aficionados out there,
I just want everyone to understand, I am my mother's first generation Genovese. It's right. Delfino. This is why I'm Jenna. Okay, Jenna Delfino Lee. So I just want, I have a little street cred.
I
just
did
want to
know
point
that,
out.
by the way. I'm just trying to.
We're just trying to be a little bit stereotypical about the red hair. I just want to. That's, as my mother says, she's the reason I can tan, and that's what she says. So that's so that's my mother for you. Okay, so here's my question. One story I don't hear being brought up at all is we have these other big data points about the economy. Right. So the U.S. economy shrinking, or shrinking or growing. We're always watching that. We're watching the American consumer. How do they spend money? Mm-hmm. Because the American consumer fuels the economy. We're the largest economy in the world. What happens here affects everybody globally.
That's right.
So while this big story is happening, we're getting a few data points that showing consumer spending is slowing down, that we're worried about the economic growth. And no one's really talking about the fact that even though despite that, there's a lot of money going into the stock market right now from just anyone. So what does that tell us about the state of the economy, but also the state of the stock market right now?
Well, now we're on to podcast for I mean, this is another hour-long conversation that I absolutely want to have with you at some point. But
okay.
The U.S. economy, to your point, is 73% driven by the U.S. consumer, people buying things, right? I mean, that's been our economy. It is what it is. And one thing I've learned over the last 15 years on fast money, and obviously over the many years I've been on this planet, is never bet against the U.S. consumer. But I think the mistake people make, don't confuse the consumers want to spend, which they always will do, with their ability to spend. Those are two entirely different things. And to your point about the stock market, the chasm, that divide between the stock market and the real economy has been going like this every single day. For 35, and this is not a political comment, but for 35 to 50 million people in this country, our fellow citizens, what we're living through right now, what they're living through right now is 1930 stuff, without question. I mean, for those people, as heartbreaking it is to say, it's a flat out depression. For a number of people, millions of people, things have never been better. I mean, think about that.
That's
crazy. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
And that's where we are right now. So, you know, for a lot of the audience listening right now, they're saying to themselves, how can the stock market until the last couple of days be at an all-time high when this economy is struggling? And the answer goes back to one of the questions that I said I'd bring up. The answer goes back to current chairman Jay Powell, but this started in the Ben Bernanke Fed of the 1980s.
Oh, man.
And why do I bring that up? Because they have absolutely flooded the system with liquidity. They've had 12 years of zero interest rates, and the unintended consequences of those actions are extraordinary. History is littered with disastrous outcomes born of good intentions, and we're seeing the signs of that right now.
Debbie is saying that she's listening to us as she quilts, which I think is actually really cool.
Huge
and
quilter.
She says it reminds me of a quilting called crazy quilting when there's so many different pieces. I think that's actually a really great analogy. I'm just looking for a few questions here before we go, Guy. Where do you think this ends up? As I do that, I'll write them down. Where do you think this ends up from here? Because the markets will close, 4:00 Eastern time, the U.S. stock market.
Right.
We're going to get a little bit of a breather. Right. We're going into the weekend. So what do you want? Not necessarily predicting. I'd love you to predict, but what also are you watching for about where this kind of goes from here?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think, I think, first of all, I think the market, the introduction of the retail investor, this is fundamentally changing capitalism. By the way, that's a good thing. I think democratization of the market is a good thing. Growing pains, no question about it. But in the aggregate, it's a good thing. And people are going to learn lessons along the way, but that's okay. I think a lot of people have been introduced to the stock market over the last year by people like Dave Portnoy. And in the absence of sports for such a long time, a lot of people found the stock market. And you can say that's a good thing, a bad thing. It is what it is. And I think this has lasted long enough where these people are not going away. But there are also lessons that people are going to learn, unfortunately, the hard way. For so many people, they've only seen the stock market go up for the last 7 or 8 months. They think you buy something and the next day it's up 3% and they think that's normal. That's problematic. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's going to end in tears. What we try to point out, and I'd love to come back with you at some point, but we try to point out, it's great when things are going well, but it's incumbent upon all of us, I think, in the media to say, hey, I get things are great in the stock market, but here's a laundry list of things that are concerning me. And whether people choose to listen to that, it's up to them. But don't be dogmatic in your views. Be open to the possibility that maybe the stock market is telling one story, but the real economy is telling you a completely different one.
We're getting a lot of great questions, including people want notes on this conversation, Guy.
So do I, by the way.
We're going to have to do 2 sets of notes. Like, this is Guy's notes on the stock market. This is Guy's notes on famous movies that he's mentioned during this time period. So we can all do this. Everyone wants us to do this again, which I think we should totally do. We should just pick a different topic every week because it's fun. Matt had a great question that I think we could probably just end on too, which is what is the threat? Like to me, to someone that's not, I'm not in this, for example, I'm not playing this game. What do I need to know as someone that's not involved? And when I'm, we're talking about this with our friends, like, what are just a couple of things to consider about understanding what the effect is for me?
I think the biggest threat, in my opinion, to the United States economy is something that nobody seems to think could happen. And that is inflation, runaway inflation. And the Fed seems to think, and this is the last analogy I'll make, but there was a great miniseries last year called Chernobyl. And I encourage the folks to Google it. 6-part series.
It's not a bright and optimistic series.
No. And it was filmed brilliantly, by the way. But the last episode takes place in the control room. And I bring that up because hubris is at the root cause of most things in life. And the hubris of the people in the control room to think that they somehow can control a nuclear reactor. And then you saw what happened when they one by one took out control rods to try to take and to create a reaction. They took out all the control rods, and then the reaction that they wanted to get was exponentially worse. So my concern is central bankers, specifically our Fed, has taken out every single control rod, hoping for a reaction of inflation. Be careful what you wish for.
Interesting.
And that's why I'm going to leave it. And I'm sorry, I'm going to come back, I promise, but I got to hop. I got to get
Okay. All right, Guy, I'll see you later. I'll finish up here.
Hopefully that was
Thank
fun.
you so much.
Hopefully you enjoyed it.
We had a great time. Okay, you go do your radio interview. I'm going to tell them how to follow you.
Bye.
All right, bye, Guy. Thank you. I'll call you later. I mean, now you guys know why I love him, right? He's great. Got 3 kids, got a wonderful wife. So much, exactly how you see him there. That's how he is, just hang out with. I mean, you're like, there's Godfather references all over the place. I don't know what to say. You guys want us to do a series? I think we should. I think we're actually at a critical point in the economy and no one's really paying attention. One of the reasons why I cover the economy is that I remember what it was like to not feel that business news was accessible. I know what it's like to feel marginalized on that. That's one of the reasons why I created Smarter News. That's ridiculous. Everyone can understand what's going on with stuff. It's like, these guys aren't that smart. Come on. Yeah, some of them are rich and powerful and some of them have more experience, but we should understand the dynamics at play, and I never want you to feel that way. That's why Smarter News was developed, so that we just bullet point the things that you need to know so you can get on with your life. And, you know, the economy is a place that we all connect. There's a lot of focus where there's divisiveness, and these stories are important. But the economy is where we're all linked. You're buying a house, you're going to put your kids in a private school, you're going to go to public school, about your tax structure, what's going on with you. All of this stuff fundamentally is the foundation for our families. And so I like putting a spotlight on it. It's really important. So if we can figure out a way maybe to do a topic with Guy, I think we might get him on Instagram. You guys, we gotta get him. So you got to go follow him on Instagram. I think it's Guy Adami. We gotta pull him over, you know. And I don't know about you, but when he was talking a little bit about the Fed, what's happening with the central banks, and, you know, the ability, people who think that they can control the variables. I was thinking about so many different things in that moment, right? This is also a big theme that we're seeing with our stories, whether it's the pandemic, and the humility that we've all needed to cover it and to live through this time. But also we've talked a lot about social media and censorship. And you guys know I love Instagram. I love social media platforms. I would be devastated not to be on them because I love connecting with you this way. But there's a big conversation right now about what exactly access looks like and who's really in control. You know, and as these companies have so many people, one of the things we haven't talked about this week, there's so many people in these companies, they're actually larger than our nation, you know. So how does it, these are really big stories that we're really having to work through, and it deserves a little bit more time. So if you enjoyed this deep dive, let us know. We'll continue it, and I think we'll get Guy back. Do you guys keep up with all the different movie references? I hope you did. All right, it's really great. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for the great questions. They were helpful directing us. And if you have any, you know, questions or comments, please let us know. We'll continue to watch this story. I think this is a great primer. And as we can build upon it, you know, and give you some more simplified bullet points of it, we will. But I think right now we kind of needed to have this conversation. So thank you so much for your support of Smarter News. I'm going to everyone right now, just like fingers crossed, kiss your elbow, throw salt over your shoulder. Sometimes when I end an Instagram live, it doesn't allow me to repost right away. So we're just gonna try to just send good energy, and I'll repost this immediately. And it'll also be up on our YouTube channel. So if you wanted to share it with someone, it'll be that format, that different Brady Bunch format on YouTube, but at least you'd be able to share it as well. All right, guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your support of Smarter News. We'll have more on the website, and keep your questions and comments coming. I really love talking to you guys. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Of course, more on Smarter News.